All right, I think I'll go ahead and start, Zhiwei. I appreciate it, and thank you very much for everyone joining us and for our speakers for providing our webinars talks today. And I'm looking forward to having 3 talks today, of which hopefully we'll have a bit of time around them to have a few questions and have a session that is kind of a little diverse here that's really neat. So starting with Zhiwei, and I'll introduce him now. Zhiwei Guo is a master's student and he's majoring in wildlife and wetland ecology at Louisiana State University in the US. He worked in Northeast China on the Liao River Basin for many years, monitoring cranes and wetlands for the International Crane Foundation. And the area is famous for playing a crucial role for migratory cranes, such as the Siberian crane, but it's often neglected by managers and researchers. And so he has like to report on the variations of wetland ecosystems in the area and the crane populations there, and share their stories with all of us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Zhiwei. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate. Thank you for inviting me to present my experiments and the story in the northeast of China, Liao River Plain. And I want to talk about how do the wetlands in that area support the migratory cranes. Okay, this is the flyweight map in the world, and in the black rectangle, it is the location of the Liao River Plain. And first, I want to give a short introduction to the Liao River Plain. I think some of you may familiar with this area, and this Liao River Plain is located in the transition zone from the semi-humid to semi-arid climate. So this means the precipitation is not so high. It's range from about 300 to 600 millimeters a year, and but the evaporation in the area is very high. It's about 1700 to 2000 millimeter, and compared to the Sun Plain here in the north of the Liao River Plain, is a little bit wider, but a little bit hotter. So, and the terrain in the Liao River Plain is steeper than the Sun Plain. So the wetland here is not, there's not too much wetland, and the wetland area is small comparing with the wetland in the Sun Plain. I know in the Sun Plain attract a lot of attention from the different researchers or volunteers or conservationists, but because they have a large area of marsh, or the wetland in Sun Plain provide both the staging and the breeding habitat for the waterbird. But in the Liao River Plain, the small and few wetlands are still critical for some waterbird and some migratory cranes. So I want to talk about it today. And in the Liao River Plain, on this map, I show some main and important wetland for the stopover of the waterbird. And in the red rectangle, you can see some I mean the blue area is for the is the wetland, and I show some the important wetland according to our bird counting. In the bottom is the Huanzidong, is a national wetland park, and Wulong Lake is a provincial reserve. And the big rectangle is the in the Mongolia of China, the Karachi sandy land, and in the sandy land, there's over 100 small wetland that can provide the habitat for the water bird. And for the wetlands in Liao River Plain, many of the wetlands are intermediate or brackish. So that means the salinity, the water or soil salinity in the wetland is high. It's about 1 or 210 ppt. So in some wetlands, the water salinity can reach 10 ppt. It's very high for the vegetation to grow and survive. And in this area, the most water body and the wetland are isolated from others, because in the over the past, I think 60 or 70 years, the government or people build a lot of dam and reservoirs to save the water or for the irrigation, controlling the flood. So now they just the wetland here just cannot connect to others naturally, and the hydrology can be influenced by the human activity dramatically. And the wetland here is most of the wetland here are rainfall dependent. Just receive the rainfall in their small catchment. Okay, and in Liao River Plain, there are 5 crane species are very common, like the Siberian crane, the Eurasian crane, Vietnam crane, red crown crane, and hoodie crane. And but for the Eurasian, Vietnam, red crown, and hoodie crane, they just the population is small, and they just during each migration, the bird just stay there overnight, 1 night or 2 nights, and then fly away. But for the Siberian crane, they stay there for a very long time. So next, I want to just talk about the Siberian cranes in the Liao River Plain to show how the wetland support the Siberian crane. And on the left is the migration routes of the satellite to track the Siberian crane. And on the map, the lines with different colors represent the different Siberian crane. And on the map, you can see all of the Siberian crane pass and stay in this area for staging habitat. And according to the satellite tracking data, we found for the individual crane, they stay in the Liao River Plain vary from 10 to 40 days. It's a long time. And for the crane population in that area, according to our synchronized survey, we found the Siberian cranes stay in this area vary from 40 to 60 days. So normally in the spring, the Siberian crane arrived the Liao River Plain at the the early March, and some crane leave at the early May, so it's 2 months. And in the fall migration, they stay there a little bit shorter, but it's about over 1 month, 40 or 50 days. And according to our monitoring, the Siberian crane population in the Liao River Plain vary from 1,000 to 3,000 in different years. So it support a large amount of cranes. You know, we estimate the Siberian cranes in the world, in the whole population of the Siberian crane in the world is about 5,500, and the crane in the Liao River Plain can represent more than 50% of the Siberian crane in the world. Okay, now we come back to the question in the title: how do the wetlands support the cranes? Because it's easy to answer, because the wetland provides the food and habitat for the cranes. And we found that there are 2 sedge species can provide the main natural food for the Siberian crane. The first is the Squipus nipponicus, and second is the Squipus planicumens. So these 2 sedge species are vegetatively reproducing perennial plants, which means it can reproduce by the seed. It provides a lot of seed in the summer, and it can also reproduce by the tuber. So on the bottom image, you can see the tuber of these 2 sedge species, and the crane can eat the tuber can find the tuber in this wetland and just get energy. And in the growing season, some study shows the seedling of the Squipus planicumens stop are sensitive to the salinity, so it can stop growing when the soil salinity reaches to 10 ppt, and suitable for the water depth for the seedling growth is less than 25 centimeters water depth. So the plant requires fresh and shallow water for germination, growth, and reproduce. But for the other sedge species, the Squipus nipponicus, we don't find many studies about this species, but according to our observation, this sedge species can survive in the deeper and more fresher water than the Squipus planicumens. So yeah, this is their requirement for the water condition. And now I just show the 2 examples of the wetland to just share my observation about the hydrology and plant community and bird. And this wetland is the Huandong wetland. It is a permanent and intermediate wetland. So it always have water here, and the salinity is it's not so high as we can say it's fresh, about 1 or 2 ppt during the year. So in May 2019, we walk into the wetland and do the vegetation survey. And we found the water in that at that time was very shallow, and we found the emergent plant are dominant in the shallow water area, and we also dig the mud and want to find the tubers of the sedge species, and we did find a lot of tuber, and these tubers are really big, and we think it can provide enough energy for the crane, and you can also see the tuber started to sprout on the May. So at that time, the perennial emergent species are dominant. We can find the sedge, the reed, the phragmite, and cattail, the typha. And in that spring migration, we count 1,400 suburban cranes, because the water level is very good for the crane, and they can get enough tuber to eat. But in 2020, you know, the rainfall, the precipitation is high in the late spring and early summer, and and in that year, the local people start to raise the fish and crab. So there's a gate on the downstream of this wetland. So the people just close the gate and want to keep a very high water levels to raise more fishes and crabs. So on the August 2020, when we visited that area again, we found the many emergent vegetation disappear. You can just find some sedge and reed on the edge of the wetland, and you can find some cattail in the deep water zone. And when you walk into the wetland, you can't see any vegetation, but you still find some sparse cattail. So the water level increased, and the emergent plant were eliminated gradually by the deep water. The deep water here means over 1 meter or 1.5 meters. And at that year, we count less than 100 suburban crane in the spring migration. And in the 2021, just still the water level there is still high, and they just keep very high water level. So when we visit there, we just found the plant on the edge of the wetland, and just reed and a little bit sedge. And when you walk on the edge of the wetland, you can find the reed, the phragmite, dominant in this shallow water area, and there's no other plants. So in 2021, there's not too many suburban cranes there. And for the second examples, I want to talk about another wetland in Keratine sandy land. It's called the Wageningen wetland. This wetland is very small. It's about 300 hectares. So it is a seasonal wetland, and it's a brackish wetland. So sometimes the salinity in the water is very high. It's about 5 to 10 ppt. and the water hydrology changed dramatically within a year. So you can see on the March 2020, when we visit there, this shallow water, the water condition pretty good. It's about 30 or 40 centimeters water depth, and there's more than 400 suburban currents. But 1 month later, when we visit there again, just everything disappeared. There's no water, no bird, and no cranes. It's just the mud and soil. And 2 months later, the mud just become drier, and we can see the salt on the soil. And we still can find some reed and sedge here, but the seaweed dominant in this area. But after that, in the summer, the rainfall, it's rain a lot in this wetland, and the wetland just come back and support the habitat for the crane in the fall migration. And we also find many cranes that go to the farmland to find the corn to eat. Maybe it's because the reduce of the wetland quality in the Liao River Plain. Because before the 2013, we've never seen the suburban cranes in the farmland. But after that, the more and more suburban cranes start to go into the farmland. So in the recent 3 years, I think the wetland condition in Liao River Plain is not so good because as I show you, the water depth is very high because of the climate and the human impact, their management strategy. And comparing to the Sun Yat-sen Plain, the wetland here is small and more sensitive to the climate. For example, in the Sun Yat-sen Plain, the wetland is large, and the crane can easily find the habitat, find the food in that very large marsh. But in the Liao River Plain, because the wetland is so small and the suitable wetland is so small, so when the water condition is not good, these cranes and other water birds cannot find a habitat in this region. So, and in the Liao River Plain is located in the semi-arid region, and the water here is limited. It supports the crane and other water bird. It also supports the human. The human need water for irrigation, for raising the fish and crab, and for other things. So how to balance the water for providing habitat for wildlife and providing the water resources for human is the questions we need to think about in this region. So that's all. Thank you. Any questions?
Thanks very much, Zhiwei. That was very good and interesting. We have some similar studies of looking closer at changing conditions from water diversion and the differences in the food resources with changing water levels. Do you see kind of a consistent change as far as what you expect in this region of staging areas for the cranes? Is it getting drier? Is it getting wetter? Is there more diversion for agriculture?
Here is not for agriculture. Is just the people the close the gate with the fish and crab, so they want to keep a high water level. So I see the plant succession in this region. You know, in 2018 and 2019, there's a lot of mudflat annual species which can provide a lot of seed for the duck and geese. And there's a lot of perennial emergent plant which can provide a tuber for the crane. But after that, the high level sustained 3 years. The high water level can just eliminate all the emergent plant, the perennial and the annual emergent plant. So the no plant as the no food. So the no cranes.
Thank you. Are there other questions? And maybe I'll ask a little bit to Nimba, if you're out there. Did the swan geese also go through this concentrated wetland area? And I've forgotten from earlier marketing if this kind of is a place where a lot of bird populations come together.
Yeah. We found a lot of swan goose in that area. It's about, in each migration season, we find at least several thousand swan goose. And the bean goose is a lot. It's over, it's about over 10 or 20,000.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that because I guess those populations are maybe more coming from the coastal side. Nimba, you have a comment?
Yeah.
Oh, we might have lost Nimba. Nimba, you want to try again?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Now we can. Go ahead.
Okay. So those wetlands in Northeast China, yes, there are lots of swan goose, but they are not from. I think they are not from Mongolia population. They are mostly from population that breed in Northeast China and in Eastern Russia. That's what I am thinking. Is that? Do you think this is the case? Graduate?
I don't know too much about the swan goose, which population it is, but I know in that area the swan goose is the population there is stable. Yeah.
We have a question from Francis. Francis, you want to?
Yeah, thanks so much, Zhiwei, for your presentation. I'm wondering, why are people raising more fish and crabs in this region than they used to?
There are money.
But was there a change in the economy of the region or a change in population? Like, why did the change happen?
This is the history in that area. People, the water is precious for everything. So they want water for irrigation. They want water for raise more fish and the crab. So it's not just the start in these 2 years. It has a, I think it has a long history.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There's a question from Professor Ma and asked about any water management plans for the future that might improve conditions for the cranes.
Yeah, actually, International Crane Foundation did a lot of work to try to connect different stakeholders in the area and want to conduct some wetland management strategy. And now we are still communicating with the government, with the wetland manager. And now we have for some wetland, we have a management strategy, but we need to talk more with them to discuss. I try to conduct this plan. And now we didn't do any, we don't do any management plan, management actions, but we are trying to step by step.
Great, very good. I think in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and move on, but thanks very much for excellent talk of an area that I really think is a very important migration area that it's great to learn about anything we can. So thank you again very much. I'll let Diane make the next introduction of our next speaker. Diane.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Zhiwei. And okay, Yachang, if you want to take control of the screen.
Yep.
I would like to introduce Yachang Cheng. She is a postdoc in the Avian Ecology and Evolution Lab at Sun Yat-sen University in China. She has a wide research interest in animal tracking and has been working on a variety of water bird species. And her PhD was investigating the causes and consequences of individual behavioral variations in birds. And today she'd like to share her results, new results of the streak shearwater tracking study from her postdoc project. So take it away, Yachang.
Yeah, thanks for the kindly invitation and introduction. So today I'm going to present some of our freshest results in the past years. So in the beginning, I would like to acknowledge all the supports from the nature reserve, from the local stakeholder, and also all the members from the Qingdao Birdwatching Association, and who facilitate the whole research, and also the head of the lab, Professor Liu Yang from Sun Yat-sen University, who actually founded this project and support me through the whole years in the past years. And also I would like to apologize for the unstable internet because I'm in the middle of the field season. So I might be some interruption. And also I apologize for the really simple analysis because it's just a preliminary result. But we do found like more questions and the answers, so it really make me excited, and I would like to talk with all the members in the AFCoW mailing list, and maybe we can generate some cool ideas, collaborations, and discussion, and so on and so forth. So for the background, and you probably heard of like the database like BirdLife or MoveBank, and if you look at the maps of the tracking data, and particularly for the seabirds, you will see that there is a huge gap for the GPS tracking data in Asia, particularly in China. Although we all know, we're aware of like GPS tracking is very useful and powerful tools for conservation and measurement, and in China there's not many tracking, particularly for the seabirds going on, and there are quite amazing work that done for the Chinese crested tern, but not really for the other seabird species like other than the flagship species. So we got an opportunity to actually start our seabird tracking study in the Dagong Island, where actually has a little bit of like research back to early 90s, and also it's one of the most well-known breeding colony for the stricted shearwater and the swinghole storm petrel. So we would like to actually coming back to this island and see what's going on and try to figure out the population and everything in there. So why study the shearwater there? So it's a near threatened bird, and also we have so the global population is actually declining. So what we located, the study population is Dagong Island, located here in the Yellow Sea, and marked in the blue star in the maps. So this species has really interesting biological background, because this species actually breeding in the isolate near Korea, China, Japan, and migrating through the sea and to the Philippines and Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. There is a geographical variation in body size, and according to the Rinch's rules, so there will be also some kind of different variation in sexual dimorphism that will lead us to have two main questions that related to conservation and management, but also has its scientific meaning. So the first question is there any sexual segregation throughout the annual cycle of this species? Because sexual segregation is due to limited resource or limited time, or the sexual and the individual are kind of from different sex, are segregated in space, time, or separated by their diet. And this behavior or this phenomenon is very important for the conservation, but it's always ignored. Most of the time ignored by the managers. For example, if different sex using different habitat, but you only design nature reserve for certain sex, that actually ignored all the rest of the individuals. So that will cause some problem. And so the first question we would like to ask is there any sexual segregation phenomenon inside of the population, particularly in Dagong Island? According to a study from Yamamoto, we can predict that the population in Dagong Island should be the body size should be relatively small, and they should also have relatively small sexual dimorphism. So we kind of curious, is that a small dimorphism, sexual dimorphism population can still lead to a certain degree of sexual segregation? And second is China has the largest the fishery fleet in the world, and also 2/3 of the agricultural product are produced in China. So even though like more than half of the seabirds are interacting with fishery activity, we still don't know anything about how the seabirds in China interact with the fishing activity in China, or even in the high sea. So another question we would like to investigate is, do they really interact with the fishery activity? Do they actually feed on the fishery discard? So that's the two main questions, like from my postdoc, I would like to answer. So yeah, sorry. I just checked if there's any questions. So we tagged like 10 shearwater backed in August last year, and luckily we got 5 female and 5 male, and we tagged them with the GPS accelerometer loggers that transmit the data through the GSM internet, like GSM network. So the GPS fix is one point per hour, and we also collect the acceleration burst, but in a really sparse resolution, because of the manufacturer couldn't do a higher sampling rate. But we asked them to do their best, and it's a local manufacturer. And we also do all the measurement and take the blood and feather samples to test the stable isotope, and as well as the DNA sexing for the individual. Then to run all the data analysis in the R. So here's some animation for the data that we got. So in general, up to now, we collected almost like 30,000 GPS fix and a bunch of acceleration data. So during the breeding season, during the breeding season, they actually move mostly along the coastline of Shandong province. But sometimes they also do a long foraging route, like now show in the animation, and return to the colony. So it looks for us is a dual foraging strategy, and inconsistent with the predictions. The population in Dagong Island actually their body size is smaller compared to the published population from Japan, and also their sexual dimorphism is also smaller compared to Japan, but they do still show a great variety of sexual difference. The first one is the female and the male actually forage in different location, and their foraging trip is also lasting for different time. The female tend to forage in a longer trip, longer duration along the coastline. So here you see the wind rows, and each bar represents the direction of the foraging trip. And the size of the bar represents the frequency of the foreign trip in that direction. And the color is actually, the darker the color is, the longer trip it was. So the female goes along the coastline, they do a really long trip and lasting for a long day, very long day. But the male tend to forage shorter, and they actually also move to the south east direction, which female are less to visit. So we see the difference of foraging direction and duration of the two sexes. Is actually because the restricted shearwater, the male usually tend to guard the nest, so it's actually inconsistent with the behavior of the species. We also see the a very clear separation between the blood cell stable isotope in both carbon and nitrogen. The carbon is kind of represented the diet of the two sexes, and nitrogen is related to the tropical level. So in breeding season, like we can tell the diet in the breeding season from the blood cell. So it's actually separated pretty clear between the sex. But when we're testing the feathers isotope, which can represent their diet in the non-breeding season because they molt during the winter time, there's no much big difference. So at least we found sexual segregation during the breeding season. And we also found the departure time were significantly different between the two sexes. Male leaves the colony earlier than the female leave the colony earlier than wintering different site. And the male went to the South China Sea, and the female, some of them passed through the sorry for the pronunciation, in the Philippines, and wintering in the Sulu Sea. But more surprisingly, what we found is another variable issue, that seems a sex-specific mortality. So until now, we only have 3 individuals still active. All of them are male. 2 of them already returned to the colony, as the map show on the left side, and another one is on its way. But the rest of the birds seems disappear. We don't know if they are, because the data is transmitted by the cell phone network, so it might be they're just wandering somewhere without any signal, or maybe it is sty. But what makes us really worrying is that all the female are gone. Particularly, there's 3 females disappear at the same time, almost same time at the same location. Another 2 female disappear in the Sulu Sea, and the other 2 male are in the South China Sea, somewhere near Malaysia, and another one in the Yellow Sea. So let's have a closer look of this 3 female, what happened with them. So in last year, late November, and late October, there's three individual, like female, they disappeared in the Chongzhou Strait at the same time, almost at the same time. And we thought they might be simply just losing their cell phone signal, but until now, no one returned. So what we think, because here you see the map, there's a huge area of urban landscape. There is Haikou, the capital of this province, and it's a huge tourist attraction, and there's huge pollution of lights during the night. So we think there might be a chance that actually they are attracted by the light during the night. So this year, if we have a chance to continue our study, I definitely going to visit the place during the season and see if that's really the case, that like maybe there's mortality due to the collision of the light or a collision. Other things I want to talk about is the fishing activity. As I mentioned in the introduction, China has the largest fishery fleet, and we have so much of agricultural. But the problem is, even though a lot of seabirds are feeding on the fish discard, the situation in China is most of the small baby fish is not discarded. they're actually collected for the agricultural feed. So not many things are wasted. So I'm still curious is how many fishery discard are contributing to the diet of the shearwater, and how they interact with them, and how is there a sexual difference? That's something I would like to answer in the future, and that I'm also writing different grant and try to see if I can get funded. We do find some evidence now, because using the data from Global Fishing Watch, here you see the maps on the left side. The lighter the color is, the higher the fishing activity it was. So in this highlight yellowish, greenish location is the Haijiu Bay, and we overlap it with the GPS tracks that we have. We also noticed that seems only female within that region, although it's not really quantitative analysis, but we definitely see a pattern of things female interact more with the fishery activity. We definitely going to look more into the detail of is the fishing activity really changed the decision of the shearwater foraging. So there's a lot of things I have to do in the future. So the first thing is maybe we can design a better nature reserve. Here you see on the left side, there's a arbitrary boundary of the Dagongda Island Nature Reserve. It's just really a square, red square. But on the right hand, you see the main area that mapping by the kernel density from the GPS data that we have is nothing close to a red square on the left. So there's a lot of work to do. Maybe we need to mapping the main area of the feeding, and maybe the potential conflict zone between the fishery, the fisher boat, and the birds, and yeah, a lot of things, a lot of the question need me to answer. And another thing, this is the last slide, since we used the accelerometer data, so we also have some kind of preliminary result for the behavior classification. I think that would be a good ending for my talk, and actually a good introduction for Yuhui's talk, since he's going to talk more into detail of his work with acceleration data. That's all for me today, and thanks for your attention. And if you have more questions and or comments, just let me know, and you can reach me through email. Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic, Yachang. Thank you for that information. Really interesting to see some of the early work being done on these shearwaters. I'm curious, in relation to some of your interest in understanding, the differences between the sexes and where they're feeding and how they might be interacting with the fishing boats. Have you guys been able to do any food observation studies? I know they're maybe hard to observe as they're burrow nesters, but any information that way, just on observations, like that give you some more clues and where the males versus females might go?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking to do. Yeah, I'm thinking that's what I'm planning to do this year. Because last year, because of COVID restriction, we are only allowed to visit that site like for a single night. You can't really stay there for longer time. But this year, we definitely would like to do. And from the local bird watching society, from their observation, they always see people see the bird actually following the boat from the fishing after all. But I might also conduct a survey, a questionnaire to the owner of the boat, and to see what they think of the birds and what they feed on, and definitely also collecting some fecal samples, for example, and do some DNA barcoding analysis. Yeah, and also stomach content, and collecting some samples and see how it actually it contains what kind of species and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there have been a few interesting studies that have used those approaches too to try and understand diet in seabirds and water birds.
Yep.
Might anybody else have? Oh, yes. Okay, so Dr. Ma has a question. Can you explain the sex segregation of the wintering sites? For Dr. Ma, please feel free to open your camera if I didn't explain that right.
Yeah, there's a list. 2 or 3 hypotheses to explain the wintering segregation, like or general sexual segregation is one competition exclusion. Maybe one gender has a higher, for example, the longer bill and are more stronger to compete with or fight with the other gender, so they can exclude the individual from other side to a good feeding site. That's one hypothesis. Another is because there are morphology difference. For example, wind loading and wingspan, wing area. So that will kind of influence their need of flying in different wind condition. So for example, the male might be heavier, so they need to have a stronger wind to forage at a certain area. So for the wintering segregation, it might be a combine of all the different hypotheses. Like there are different nutrition need or different timing of migration. The female left the colony earlier, so maybe they can occupy a better. I need to quantify that. So different places, they choose to go to different locations. So yeah, there's a lot of answer, I would guess. But thanks, Professor Ma. That's really interesting topic. I would like to look deeper.
Lots of great additional things that you'll be looking into over the coming months and year. Thank you, Yachang.
Yep.
And especially for joining us during your busy field season and remote location. So hang around. If there's additional questions for Yachang, we can have them towards the end. And I'm going to pass it over for Jeff to introduce our last speaker. Yep. Thank you.
All right. So our next speaker, and you can go ahead and start screen sharing whenever you're ready, will be Hui Yu, a postdoc researcher in experimental zoology group at Wageningen University. His research focuses on interface between advanced sensor technology and data modeling to boost research in animal sciences. His PhD research focused on studying wild duck behavior in a continuous fashion through onboard accelerometer data processing. And his talk today will be looking at behavior classification of Pacific black ducks through use of their GPS transmitters. Go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, and thank you for inviting me to this group and give the talk here. So today I'm going to talk about next generation smart tracker to monitor wildlife behaviors continuously through onboard behavior processing, mainly on accelerometer data. So we use this system on Pacific black ducks in Australia. Our understanding of the animals, whereabouts of animals have been improved with the developing of different technologies. So in the beginning, maybe we only do observations of animals in the wild. And afterwards, when we have bands or rings to ring animals, we can know like the wintering and breeding grounds, and also do some population monitoring. Afterwards, we could use VHF to study local movements of animals. And then nowadays, mostly we use GPS or satellite trackers to track the whole migration route of some animals. And with the development of technologies, we also can answer more complex questions. So biotelemetry is not only using the devices to track where the animals move, but also some other aspects of the animals, also the environmental factors. So the development of the tracking devices have better temporal and spatial resolutions nowadays, and the animals we can track have smaller body size because the trackers are also become smaller. And then there are additional environmental and physiology factors can be monitored with different sensors, such as light intensity, heart rate, temperature, and also magnetic field sensor to study how some animals navigate. And among all the sensors, accelerometer has been greatly used in recent years to study animal behaviors and also energy expenditure. These are some increasing trends in literature. And then because the accelerometers are relatively flexible equipment, they can be really small. And then the price for accelerometers are cheap. And also they give a lot of information for the wild animals. So today the system we used include GPS and also accelerometer. Let's see how people used accelerometers in different studies. The first example is that because accelerometer can have give us different waveform patterns based on different animal behaviors. So they've been used to deduce unobservable behaviors of animals. And when accelerometer data were combined with data from respirometry or doubly labeled water, they can be used as a proxy for the energy expenditure. And some researchers also use accelerometer for biomechanics studies because they can derive the frequency of such like the stride frequency or stride amplitude. And finally, when combined with a magnetic sensor, accelerometer data can also be used for track depth reckoning. This can be quite useful for marine animals since we couldn't get location data when they are underneath water. And we focus on behaviors today. So there are some limitations of previous applications with accelerometers. The first one is that they usually need have high storage demand. Usually those sensors were set at 1 to 300 Hertz for sampling. And then one example here is that if we set 3-axis accelerometer at 25 Hertz and sample continuously, that will result in 14 megabytes data per day. And then this can be a burden to some small trackers storage and also be a burden to battery energy when these data need to be remotely transmitted. So that's the second limitation of accelerometer data. Then the previous solutions either use intermittent sampling as Yachang showed. So they sampled one burst of accelerometer data every 30 minutes. And then they kind of, or other research kind of lose information during those sampling gaps. And the other research using continuous sampling usually have a little bit confined research period, and then maybe some meaningful ecological findings could not be indicated. So onboard accelerometer data processing might be a solution to the previous limitations. This graph shows 3 strategies. The first panel A, shows the traditional strategy that's using the tracker as a logger, just log raw data. And Newton and colleagues use the way that's shown in panel B. Instead of transmitting raw accelerometer measurements, they calculated some summary statistics of the accelerometer data to reduce the data transmitted through UHF, I think. And then the data reduction ratio in their study was 6. And then the final panel shows the study that we do in this research. So instead of calculating summary statistics, we also classify the behaviors of animals on board of the trackers directly. And this can further reduce the data need to be transmitted. There were actually also other studies using onboard accelerometer data processing for animal behaviors. So Solomon and colleagues studied behaviors of rhinoceros in 2017, but in their system, they need to get the tracker back from the rhinoceros and then reprogram the tracker to let it work in a mode that can calculate behaviors. But for some animals, these might not be applicable. And there are also applications in livestock and human research or sport sectors. but these trackers were usually specifically designed for one species or one kind of activity, and those were also not flexible enough to be used on different animal species. And to give a little bit background of the method that we used for this kind of study, that's called supervised machine learning. And then I just show a very simple example of what is supervised machine learning. So if we think of the body weight and wingspan of bird species as their features, then we can do these features for several different species. And then we also tell the computer program what the species is when doing all these measurements. So the program can actually learn from the different data and patterns with the labels that now is the species. And the programs will find a classification model best to segment those data points. So they might, with different machine learning methods, you might have different segmentations, and then some of them might be better than the others. So that's a very simple explanation, but I use this system on for the onboard processing of data. This is the system that we use to track wild ducks in Australia. There are two important features of this system. The first one is the tracker has two data communication transmission modules. One is 3G mobile network and the other is Bluetooth. And I will show you why Bluetooth is useful in this case. And then the tracker can also work in two different modes. That's a raw data collection mode. You can watch the birds and record some data and do the data labeling. And the other mode is when we have we already have a trained model, we can use onboard processing mode just to derive the behaviors on the devices. So firstly, we need to capture the ducks and put loggers on them as backpacks. And the next step, I use some specific developed tools to monitor the ducks in the wild within 70 meters. That's the range of the current, or the system I used, the range of the Bluetooth. So in that case, I can use my phone to connect the logger with Bluetooth, and then the raw accelerometer data will be sent back directly to the phone, and I can do the behavior labeling in the wild. So after gathering enough data, I trained a supervised machine learning model that's called XGBoost. And then the model can be transmitted back to the device, either through a mobile network, if I'm close enough, mobile Bluetooth if I'm not enough to the bird, or through mobile transmission when the trackers do the daily data transmission. So, and the final step is that the tracker can work in the onboard processing mode to transmit continuous behaviors. And we use this system on Pacific black ducks in Southeast Australia. We did the behavior labels from 6 different individuals and studied 8 different behavior types. So that's resting, preening, feeding, dabbling, walking, floating, running, and flying. So we tried to be as comprehensive as possible for every behavior types, and then regroup some behaviors because they could not be distinguished from machine learning models. And here is an example of the observation that I did in the field. So that's one duck with a tracker swimming or dabbling on top of water. Yeah, after gathering enough data, we trained a XGBoost machine learning model with 10 summary statistics or features and 80 trees. That's the structure of the model. And we had 92% overall accuracy for these 8 behaviors. And all the data processing on board of the tracker takes 55 kilobytes of memory out of the 1 megabytes programming memory on the trackers. So that can be well handled. And let's see the data compression ratio. So the raw data, if we collect at 25 Hertz, that's the raw data number. And then I also showed that that's 14 megabytes of storage per day. And then with only behaviors, so one behavior per 2 seconds, resulting 43,000 behaviors, and that takes 17 kilobytes of storage, and the data compression ratio is 1,000. So this amount of data can well be handled by the 3G mobile network used on these trackers. And we also proved that this method is also energy efficient. So just to see the bottom part, that's 200 milliamp hour battery on board of the trackers. I think that's like average battery used on duck trackers. If we only use that for behavior studying, that can last 130 days. And here is a detailed result of the first duck that we tracked using this method. That's the first 3 days of data of this individual. And the bottom, top part shows the geographical locations of this individual. The white rectangulars shows their daily roosting site, and the orange one indicate the dawn or dusk site, and the black one is the nighttime site. And so at the bottom, the ethogram shows the behaviors by time. And we can see that, so the one interesting part is the orange part, although they are quite limited. So the ducks, this duck stop there mainly to feed at the dawn or dusk site. And we can also see that in the nocturnal site, the duck had a lot of walking and also feeding behavior. So that means at that period, the duck spent a lot of time feeding at night. But that's not always the case. As we can see here, for this individual, we've been studying or using this system on this one for 16 months up to the end of this March, when it was unluckily shot by a local hunter. But I think these data are pretty valuable. So this is ethogram showing we started to track this individual from November of 2020 until recently. And then the black curves indicate sunrise and sunset time. And if we just see in the feeding behaviors, so sometimes the duck feed at night, but sometimes not. So if you say that's a nocturnal feeder of the ducks, that's not always the case. And we did some more analysis of this kind of continuously logged behavior and see how it can improve the previous method. So the first one we did is that try to downsample the continuously recorded behaviors in with different intervals. In this example, we use 30 seconds, 5 minutes, and 30 minutes sampling intervals. And then the bars box plots shows the errors when using different sample intervals. For example, if we see flying, because the duck doesn't fly a lot, maybe under 10 minutes per day on average. If we use 30 minutes sampling interval, the error rate might be pretty high, and also for other behaviors. So instead of improving the time budget estimation, one thing from this kind of logging can give us is not only the behavior proportions, but also each behavior durations can also be very useful. So for example, we used the daily flight bouts to measure their true flying distance in a day compared with the straight line distance between GPS fixes with 1 hour intervals. So we assume the birds fly at 15 meters per second. That's based on the previous research of Mallet. And then the discrepancy here is like the true distance derived from behavior-based distance is like 2.5 kilometers far than the GPS-based distance on average. And this didn't count the walking distance of the duck. So from our data, the ducks on average walk 100 minutes. I don't know the average speed, but that can also add like 1 or 2 kilometers per day on their true distance. So this can be very useful for like energy expenditure estimation also. And for ecological application and also conservation, this kind of data can also give us a behavior-based home range estimation. So we not only know where and when birds go, but also what birds do at different sites. So I used a 72-day example of the individual to show how behaviors can be used for their home range. In the top map, the map was clustered or rasterized based on the GPS locations, and then the color of the different cells indicate how much energy the bird spent in those 72 days. So darker color means the duck spent more energy there. And also we grouped all the behaviors in different cells and see their functional differences and used hierarchical clustering. So like the first 5 cells here, 16, 16, 5, 6, and 12 and 13, those cells have relatively more feeding behaviors. So that might indicate the birds spend more time at those very small cells feeding. And the rest cells function mostly as the resting or site. So the birds generally have more preening and also resting behaviors in those cells. So the middle panel in the bottom shows when the birds duck use different cells in a day. So like for 16, 6, and 5, the duck mainly used these cells in dawn and dusk time. That's the main feeding time of all the ducks in common, I think. And also at 12 and 13, the duck use this site at night, but that's also a very important feeding site. And then compared to site 3, that has 12 and 13, site 1 have 1 and 2. But for this nighttime roosting site, the duck didn't feed a lot. So maybe at that period, the duck had enough day feeding and don't need to compensate the demand at night. And the final panel shows the seasonal difference of different cells. So in another case study with 3 ducks that went through wind molting during our tracking period, we compared their time activity budgets before, during, and after wind molting. So these ducks were relatively sedentary. Only one individual, that's duck 5246, chose a molting site that's like 50 kilometers away from our catching site on the other side of the bay. The other 2 ducks mainly have their activities very close to the catching site that's marked by the blue point. And interestingly, we found that all these 3 individuals increased their feeding time during wind molt and reduce their resting time. So that means they might actively feed during this period to compensate the energy need for feather regrowth. And one more interesting result is that we found they increased their wing flap behaviors at the final 20 days of wind molt. So that might mean that they actively flap to exercise their breast muscles to regain the flight ability once they finish wind molt. So come to the conclusions. Onboard processing for behavior classification can be energy efficient, as we've shown that we used the system on 1 duck for 16 months of the behaviors continuously. and then it can trigger new ecological applications and findings. So there was a recent study using onboard behavior classification to trigger camera recording of target fish species on gulls. So because cameras need more space and energy to run, so in this case, they use the onboard calculated behaviors. When the bird was in foraging mode, they turn the cameras on. So in this case, they can extend the time of sampling. And also this might be a very valuable tool for conservation. So this work was done by a lot of people's help. So first I need to thank my supervisor, Marcel Klassen, and also collaborators in the lab, Pat Baya, and also Toby. So I also need to thank Trent Lin and Ken Farmer for the field works. And because that's a tracking system, so the Zhiwei team in China helped a lot with the development of these trackers and also the onboard programming. Also, I need to thank my wife to support me in Australia, and also some artwork in my publications. Yeah, thank you.
Very nice. Thank you very much. So I'll start us off with the questions, and as always, please feel free to throw questions in the chat. My immediate thought here is that this is a really in-depth look at some of the different uses for this technology, and you've seen it be used with different species throughout at different levels. How applicable do you think some of your calibrations are to other dabbling duck species? You know, is this, obviously you would want to do some calibration on new species, but do you think this is something that could work very quickly modified for like a mallard, which is much more widely distributed? Or, you know, do you think it really is going to be dramatic differences?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think for the similar species, like similar shape or body mass, body size and formation species like mallard, and similar behavior sets, they can be quite useful. So maybe this can be have a relative good accuracy when using a mallard. But if they are quite different, then you might need more calibration data. And I'm now working on like a transfer learning model. So that's like you train a model based on some previously collected data, and on a new species or new sets of behaviors, you only need a small amount of newly labeled data, and then the transfer learning can use the previous knowledge into new models. So yeah, that's something I'm working on now.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, this really is an exciting approach, and I think a lot of people in the chat are agreeing there. One question that I'm sure a lot of folks have coming from Shanghai is the general cost of these loggers and the cloud-based transmission.
The loggers, so the loggers from Zhiwei are the same price as their normal selling, but maybe they want to charge a little bit more for the data service because that's some extra functions. But I think because of this collaboration, they now have a quite good knowledge of what part of the tracker can be customized, and then depends on different needs to do some different adjustments. And another thing for this kind of model I used is that the trackers can also be very minimized. So the current lowest weight for the loggers is 2.8 grams. But that's based on Bluetooth communication, so no cell phone signals, only Bluetooth. But yeah, that's also something people can work on.
And what was the transmission range you had with the Bluetooth?
The trackers I used on ducks had only 70 meters because they don't have extended or long antennas.
Sure.
But for the Bluetooth ones, like the 2.8 grams I mentioned, if you use a data extender or like a station for that purpose, that can reach at least 600 meters. I've tried by myself. So that's already pretty good for many bird species.
Yeah, sure. Is there anybody else with any questions?
I had a quick question, Bruce. wondering how much you can store on board before you have to offload. So can you let it just keep running and running and then still get it several days later?
Yeah, sure. So like I showed that the current memory need for 1 day of continuous behavior records is 17 kilobytes. So we didn't do more compression of that, although we can do so. For example, if the bird do some behavior consistently for a time interval, we just need to record behavior and the interval without each behavior for 2 seconds. So that can be further compressed. And then I don't know, maybe the current onboard storage is 16 megabytes. So that can already save several, maybe over 100 days of data. I didn't count that. So yeah.
Yeah, I know that some of the studies, especially the GPS trackers have, or at least the other systems, GSM systems, have had to wait for birds to come into zones where they're available. And more recently, one of the problems has been, I believe it's, isn't the level 3 going away as far as the 3G in many places that they're shifting, and which is causing people to have to change their transmitters, right?
Yeah, we faced that. We faced that problem when I first went to Australia. So they shut down 2G, and now I'm in Europe. They shut down 3G, so they have 2G. That's a problem. But yeah, the company is also investigating more different networks like 5G or Internet of Things network. So yeah, they also need to follow the speed of the networks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, John, I think this is a good opportunity to go ahead and transition if you have any final thoughts for the group.
Yeah, thanks very much. I really appreciate the talks today. Thank you, Bruce, and thanks to our other speakers. I want to mention that this is the last AFCoW webinar of this spring. We're hoping to bring it back in the fall. And I think we should, have a group chat, maybe through the simple list, about what people would like to see. Because I'd like to maybe consider some focus topics, like what's the technology? Maybe we'd have a webinar or two, maybe longer, or at least with different experts coming in, and we can share it on the website and also do it on the webinar. Maybe it's by area. We focus on a particular area of one of the two flyways, the Central Asian or the East Asian Australasian flyways, and have a focused area, or focus on a species group like cranes, for example, or seabirds. And other possibilities are trying to figure out like differences that people have studied in life stages or age and sex differences. So all of these things are possible, and I really want contributions for this. We'll probably send out a survey, a questionnaire about what people would like to see as we do planning, and we certainly hope you will volunteer others or yourself what you could talk about for the next round of talks that we hope to start up. I think we're talking about September, October. We'll get back to it after people have done a lot of the field work in the Northern Hemisphere. So in terms of, suggestions, really appreciate that. And thanks to everyone for joining. Any other comments, Diane, or anything?
No, that's it. Thank you, everybody. It's been a great first round. So we really hope to keep communications going at least through email, the simple lists through the field season, and hope that we can gear up for reconnecting folks again in the fall.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be talking to you later.